Welcome back to the Frontier Faith Podcast. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jeff, and today we have a special episode where we have our first guest, and we're excited to have a conversation with you, Jeremiah. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Happy to be here.
So, Jeremiah, you are a police officer, and you've been doing that now for quite a few years, right?
Yeah, just past 7 years last month.
So, we're thrilled to have you on here for many reasons. So, one of the questions we want to just kind of get your background. How did you get into law enforcement?
Job opportunity, honestly. Being 23-year-old man, married with a wife, and at least one child. My part-time employment was not meeting our needs, so was offered or shown an opportunity through one of my former coworkers at a coffee shop that had started working with corrections. So I applied. Didn't think I would get the job. Got the job. Um, God is so amazing with how things work out, right? Like super non-confrontational, younger of four children, little sister, she didn't count. But you know, your status in your family like really plays a role in how you develop, right? And
Sure.
mannerisms, stuff like that. Never would have thought of myself as being a correctional officer. They had opened up Goose Creek out in Point McKenzie and needed a bunch of officers. I applied just not knowing that. Happenstance, 6 months after that place had opened.
And how long ago was this? What year did you?
2013.
Okay, so 2013, you get into corrections.
No, applied 2012, into 2012. Yep.
Okay.
And then, they ask you to like put in for your top 3 prisons that you want to work at.
Okay.
And my buddy had gone out to Palmer, so I was like, well, I'd like to work at PCC. And then I honestly, I think Matsu was my second, and then Goose was my third.
Okay.
And they're like, well, that's great, but you're going to Goose because that's where we need people. So did 5 years out there. Had a hit put out on me that did not sit well with my wife. So
Can you explain what a hit is?
Several prisoners had put out like hey, we'll pay you guys if you assault this CO. And
Wow.
yeah, so for all those COs out there, pay attention to your mod. So I was working day shift, come in and notice the majority of my mods awake, which is not common at 6 o'clock in the morning. Usually you have like five dudes at 128 that are up every morning. Those dudes are usually up either walking or reading their Bible. There was a small group that would do like Bible studies. And it was like 50 of my prisoners were awake. And I was like, that's weird. And then dudes that were already sentenced, already done with their appeal process, like hugging each other, saying bye. Like, you ain't going nowhere. Like, that's super weird.
Wow.
So I called one of my other buddies and was like, dude, like, how's your mod look? And he was like normal. Like, I got like 3 dudes up right now. I'm like, half my mod's awake. And this prisoner, this prisoner, this prisoner, this prisoner are all saying bye to each other. And they like got 8, 20, 30 years. Like, they don't have court. They're not going anywhere. Like, why are they saying bye? And he's like, dude, I think you need to call a sergeant. And so I called my sergeant. I was like, dude, I think I'm going to get assaulted today. So told him all my observations. So they I gave him a list of everybody I noticed acting weird, saying bye, giving hugs to each other and stuff like that. And so the security team, who's like the detectives of the prison world, they're COs. They just work in a different department. They listen to phone calls and stuff that are recorded. They came down and like picked up like 11 of my prisoners in addition to like the 7 I gave them.
Mhm.
How old were you at this time?
So I was 27.
27, wife, and two kids at that
No,
point.
no, 3 kids.
Okay.
We had Fletcher at that point.
Wow.
So um, told my wife about it that night, and then um, go to work the next day, and the usual status quo for whenever a CO is about to get assaulted is they pull him out of the mod. I'm like, no, these guys don't get to dictate where I work. Like, you're gonna leave me in the mod. We took out the threat. If there's still a threat, well, that it'll show itself, right? Get home the next night. My wife's like, hey, I applied to a law enforcement agency. And I was like, well, I'm not going to pass their test, but I'll go and take it. So I go and take their test and pass. And they're like, well, when can we schedule you for your physical? You're like, athletics test, right? I'm like, well, actually, I don't even really want to work with you guys. I'd rather work for another department. So I applied for them. Um, there's a whole story into that whole process too. I was late to my first test and
Oh wow.
like walked in on the minute. I just got off nights and uh, my wife misunderstood where we were going. I was trying to catch a nap on the way in, wake up on the way, and like we had stopped and met my brother and sister-in-law, and it was like, we don't have time for this. Like, where we're like, it's saying that we're going to be there like right on time, and if you're on time, you're late.
Mm.
Um, walk in dressed in a suit and tie, see another dude walking in suit and tie. I was like, hold the door for him because just because I'm late doesn't mean I get to forget my manners.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that dude was not another applicant like I had assumed. Somebody with some sway, and so I kind of get chewed out by the recruiting officer, and he's like, "You're gonna have to reschedule your test." Well, that other person was like, "Come on, Mark, give him a chance." He held the door for me, so they let me go in and take the test.
Wow.
And so I sit down and I take the test, and I was like, "God, this was way easier than the other one."
The physical test?
No, the written, the
Oh,
initial
okay.
test. And so they have you like come out of the classroom after you're done, and you just like wait, and then they call your name or your number. It's not even your name. They call your number, and you come around the corner, and so they're calling all these people over, and hey, man, you can still hear. And
Sure.
hey, sorry, you can reapply in a year. You can reapply in a year. You can reapply in a year. And I'm like, maybe the test was not as easy as I thought. So then they call my number and I walk over and it's the same dude that didn't want to let me in. And he's like, hey, congratulations. Yeah, of course it's you. Go ahead and schedule your physical, and they like have all these dates listed. And he's like, what time are you going to show up? And I was like, 2 hours early. And he's like, well, don't be ridiculous. No, I showed up 2 hours early. Just wait. I was like, I'm not being late.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's how my law enforcement outside of prison career began.
So you open the door for people. You never know what doors
Don't
open for
forget your
you.
manners.
That's right.
Open doors can open when you open doors.
Absolutely.
Wow. So you started in 2012, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And when was the shift? What year was it?
It was 2017.
Okay.
So I was Academy 17 too.
So you have a wife and 3 kids in that point when the thing happened with the mod and with the corrections.
Yeah, 28 whenever it's like right around my birthday.
So just kind of looking backwards, because you and I grew up together, know each other for decades now. But from your own experience and your perspective, how did you, like, I'm curious as to what kind of faith you had going into law enforcement. So let's even go back further and how did your faith solidify in your life? When did your faith begin and really become like, okay, I need to lean into this?
It's a story you will know. So my junior year, summer of my junior year, going into my senior year of high school, one of my older brothers fell off a mountain, was in a coma for 21 days. And that was a very trying time. But that was like growing up, I grew up in the church, like, Mike, but like, and Jeff, like we all grew up in the church. But your faith is kind of your parents for
Sure.
until something happens, right?
Right.
Get tested.
Yep. And so at that point, not saying like I've never slipped from that point, but at that point, it's like this this is for real. Like my brother fell like 40 feet off a mountain and didn't break a bone. Like, yeah, he broke his brain, but that's incredible. My dad's story and my brother's story with that is absolutely incredible. But seeing how that incident brought like the whole community of Wasilla together,
Mm-hmm.
just absolutely mind-boggling, earth-shattering. Like, talk about solidifying faith. Like, my brother's in a coma 21 days, wakes up, has to relearn how to walk, relearn how to talk, like, doesn't know what words mean. Like, the way the doctor was describing it to us, your like words and definitions are linked via synapses.
Okay.
And when he hit his head, like all those shifted. So he would say like a sentence to you that makes sense in his mind, but it's just gobbledygook. Like he's saying words, but they're just
They're not coming out.
nonsensical.
Gotcha.
So just watching him go through that was, for one, really accusatory, I guess. Like looking like this shouldn't have happened to him.
Oh,
You know
okay.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, but at the same point, it was really encouraging seeing the strides that he made and still continues to make. Like Jake has always been one of my role models,
Mm-hmm.
and watching him do so well has been great. So,
And you were how old?
so 17, yeah,
And that's a huge pivotal time in
right?
your own faith development.
Yep.
So you have you said you used the word accusatory. You have some questions that come up, I'm sure, faith wise, and
I think I used the wrong word, like self-accusatory, guilty.
uh
I felt guilt, like that was the wrong brother that happened to, right?
oh
Mm.
Um,
I guess survivor's guilt type
yeah, I
thing.
guess. It's just weird. Like the day it happened, it was a Sunday morning. I remember this. My dad's parents are in town while my dad and my brother are out hunting. And my dad had called and I answered the phone. And when I answered the phone, it sounded just like my brother. And so I called him by my brother's name
hmm.
and like, how's it going? And like, you guys heading home? I need to talk to mom. Okay, good to talk to you too.
Yeah.
And then my mom just leaves.
Mm.
Doesn't say a word, it's that no fault on her.
Sure.
And so we go to church and not knowing nothing.
Wow.
And then they announce it. I'm like, oh, well, Jake probably like broke his leg or something. He's fine.
I remember that. Yeah.
So then we go
So
to the
you heard about
hospital.
it from the announcement?
Yeah.
Wow.
So then, we all go to the hospital in Anchorage. Um, and that's when you like everything kind of, oh, this is serious. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's crazy. This is a crazy couple months.
Definitely. Well, I think that's important to understand just looking at your journey and that's your faith that was now being brought into these positions where you're now an officer in the community and all these things are connected. And so I'm curious as to like how has your faith now been shaped by because your faith's continuing to grow, the Lord's continuing to grow you. So how has your faith continued to be changed and grown by the Lord in your role as an officer?
In my role as an officer,
Yeah, in the community, seeing people, at either the lowest point of their life or a very low point or even the end of their life, how has your role as an officer, has your faith been affected by being in this position?
I mean, it's something that's like a solid, right? Like I know that we serve a God, a good God. I
Hmm.
know that he's so good, he sent his son to die for my sins. and not only mine, but like everybody I talk to, right? And like the biggest problem that we deal with is drug addiction.
Yeah.
It is so rampant and all encompassing that like I don't go a day at work where I don't talk to somebody that is struggling with addiction.
Wow.
Being able to offer the absolute resource is hugely like it's the only source of hope that any of us have, right? But while doing that, offering them other resources to help them out of their situation, right?
Right.
Now, typically it falls on deaf ears, like those typically those people have to be at the low of the low to even look for an option out because uh, it has to be at like a moment of sobriety
Mm-hmm.
because if you're offering it to somebody when they're high, like they're great. Like, what do you mean? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, I am on top of the world right now, even though I'm killing myself.
Hmm.
But the majority of my solidification of faith comes from everything that happens outside of work almost, uh, other than like the challenges I face at work. Um, yeah.
You mentioned drugs being and the lack of sobriety being constant or very common. So that that makes me want to ask a question of like is what are some common threads you see through crimes like within criminal activity? And so it seems like substance abuse of some kind is not only often but almost always a factor. Or what percentage of a ballparking do you see substance abuse being a factor in people finding themselves in such places?
Outside of like the home, like the domestic situations, I mean, alcohol still plays a large role in that often, but actual like addiction to controlled substances, it's a huge factor. Like, if not 100%, outside of
Wow.
domestic violence situations, almost 100%. Like
Really?
it's yeah.
And is there a, a spectrum of substance abuse that you see, or is it typically like some major players that are, whether it's fentanyl or whether it's heroin or meth or
So we see trends,
okay,
right? Like fentanyl like really came in and we saw a huge uptick in overdoses because you have people that are typically using meth and then they're transitioning over to fentanyl. It's cheaper, right? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
hey, try this, try this, try this.
it's cheaper. Oh, okay.
It was.
Oh,
Um, so you see a huge uptick in overdoses because they're used to using a different substance. So they have a tolerance for that and then take a lethal dose of fentanyl, which is not much.
Mm.
And like pretty much touching any of that or inhaling any of that for you or I that don't use that, like overdose.
wow.
Mm.
So like we have to be super careful when we're at work, like even touching this stuff, right? Like
Have you guys had some issues with that? Have you had any of you
so
guys?
we, as far as I know, there are so many officers, right? And like I only know what happens in my little bubble
Mm.
at work, but as far as I know, no, we haven't had any issues
Good.
with that. But there are reports down in the States of guys opening up packages and just falling out.
Wow.
Man,
But cocaine's making a comeback. Like we're seeing an uptick in cocaine again. Heroin's kind of on the downward. That's been
Is there
so
anything
trend.
that's like unique to Alaska that you
yeah,
noticed in Alaska
No,
compared to other places?
no, we're
just like everywhere else.
yeah.
Interesting. I would have imagined being further away and being more isolated that we would have a different kind of spread of things. So it's just kind of the same.
Prices might be different,
Yeah.
but
where's it come from? Who's bringing these drugs? Or are they making it here? Or are they
Uh,
smuggling it in
Most of
somehow?
it is out of state stuff, yeah.
Wow. So how much I'd be curious to know whether with drugs or alcohol, when you are working during the winter time versus the summertime, what impact does the cold, dark, the climate of Alaska have um, on a lot of the people that you are serving, and particularly those who are addicted to substances?
Their lack of their own well-being. Like you'll get people stripping naked middle of winter out
Yeah.
on a public road, and it's like so we have what's called Title 37 here in Alaska.
Title 47? Is it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's when somebody is likely to cause harm to themselves or others or is gravely disabled, so unable to care for themselves. Can't like when's the last time you ate? Do you have adequate clothing, stuff like that? So that with that, I as a law enforcement officer, uh, doctors, EMTs, stuff like that, they can take somebody against their will to be held at like a psychiatric ward for
Mm,
I think it's up to 72 hours or something like that, but usually it's a couple hours.
wow.
So that's like suicidal. Um, Sometimes people that have some mental health issues, they're like, I'm going to kill people,
Wow.
so we can take them for title instead of them do that. But
So are you faced with any sort of boundaries that you have to maintain regarding the intersection of your faith and work? Like as a police officer, are you allowed to be open? You're talking about providing the ultimate hope. Are you allowed to be open about those things with people, or do you have to have boundaries, or how does that work?
yeah, you have to have boundaries. Like we have to remain professional, right? But I like to offer resources, and the resources I know is some great congregations in the area
Sure.
that have good people that will potentially help them get food, help them get work, help
Mm-hmm.
them, fulfill their needs. Um, but as previously stated, like people that have addictions often use crime to satiate those addictions because usually somebody that is addicted to methamphetamine or addicted to fentanyl or heroin or whatever illicit substance you can think of, they lose the ability to maintain a job.
Yeah.
So they turn to theft or whatever other means to pay for or to acquire those substances. And so trying to offer resources, but also not trying to create a situation where they can victimize other people is something that I wrestle with. Like,
Yeah.
do I just steer them to a church full of sweet and loving people that may be ignorant of what this could turn into? You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so I think I've spoke with you about that, Mike, off camera, about that struggle because it's like, what's the right answer?
Yeah, trying to discern wolves and sheep,
Yeah,
and
and also
but
not
we're all
being
sheep,
my
but
congregation.
right,
Sure.
and we don't want to just idolize our comfort, and but we also need to think of Jesus' words about us looking to be as innocent as doves, but also shrewd as serpents,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
and having wisdom with how we reach out to people. And so, we're no better than anybody else. Our dirt's not cleaner than anybody else's dirt. And someone that's high as a kite on something that has, a super checkered past, no, all of sin falls short of the glory of God. And, uh, and so we also need to have wisdom with who we're putting in a room together in certain environments. So curious for, as you're interacting with with people that are stuck in these types of ruts. From your perspective, like how does someone get into a life of drugs? Like what are some driving factors,
Mm-hmm.
for someone because you don't just wake up and be like, you know what, today I'm gonna dedicate my life to drugs. Like that. Like,
Yeah.
Right.
so what's kind of some like dominoes in your perspective that lead to that?
I mean, everybody has their own story. And whether or not people are honest with me when I'm at work is hit or miss at best, right?
Sure.
Um, like we have a saying, everybody lies to the police.
Mm.
But I've heard, oh, I've been using since I was 13. Like, using what? Oh, no, I took my first hit of meth when I was 13 years old. I've just been addicted to it
Are
ever
they
since.
Is that usually like a boast to say
No,
that, or is that
like,
like a
this is a reason why I did X, Y,
oh,
and Z,
okay,
usually. Which could be the case. I don't know your past, you know what I mean? Um, but you often see folks that get injured. They need pain meds. They're on those pain meds for an extended amount of time. Now they're addicted to it.
Yeah.
It's time to get off. And it's like, well, they still are addicted to it. Like, so what do you do?
Mm.
Do you go and get help, which would cost money, or do you go and buy controlled substances from, because they're everywhere. Like it baffles me how readily available you can purchase them.
interesting. And especially if they're in pain for those pain meds and they run out and they're still in pain, chronic pain will drive people to all sorts of desperate places.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what about you and I had talked before and about certain social media apps like I
Mm-hmm.
think you just mentioned
Snapchat.
Snap
Yeah.
as
I
being.
hate Snapchat.
So tell us why you hate Snapchat.
But it is something that, at least early on in my career, and pretty sure it still holds true today, but was often used um, to facilitate uh, drug transactions.
Oh.
So like teenagers, like juniors and seniors in high school, like dealing with big boy, like adult drug dealers. And I remember one of the like first shooting calls I ever responded to was like a drug rip. These high school kids
Oh wow.
via Snapchat were selling prescription meds to another dealer who was also, in exchange for the prescriptions, was going to give them like a ridiculous like cartoon style bag of marijuana, because that's mainly what their clientele in high school are looking for is marijuana.
Right.
So they show up with their cartoon sized bag of prescription meds, and the other dude just produces a handgun, and like they're both in their vehicle, and the dude just like rests the gun on the wheel of the teenager's car. Mind you, these are like 15, 16-year olds with their 9-year-old sibling
Mm-hmm.
in the vehicle. Well, he rests the handgun on the tire and just tells them like, "Give me the bag." Well, as they're like, "Okay, man," like handing him the bag, I think it was a negligent discharge. Shot goes off into the wheel well, which ricochets off the frame and goes up and goes through the 15-year-old's butt cheek and was like, didn't break the skin on the top, but was like just right on the surface.
Oh my.
And then the dude takes off with drugs. And
Wow.
but it's like these kids are getting into this, right? Like, oh, this is lucrative. All you do is you make a Snapchat and all the evidence goes away so your parents can't see it.
So that's why they would use it, because
Yeah,
the
yeah.
picture goes away or
Yep.
whatever. Wow. I remember, so I grew up in Anchorage, and you both grew up out here in the valley, and so I went to Service High School, and drugs were everywhere. So I graduated high school in 2010. So Snapchat wasn't out yet or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that, but I remember even then thinking like, where is all this coming from? But marijuana predominantly, but I know my freshman year, most of my friends, I mean, it was all about weed, and then my junior senior year, those who were still in school, they were into other stuff by that point.
Yeah.
It's just
It's a slippery slope. Like
yeah.
And that's the sell, right? Like that's the selling point. Like, oh, it's just pot. It's not addictive.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's like, oh, you think this is good? Let's move to like something that's more fun, right? Fun. It's always advertised as like this,
Yeah.
oh, great thing that's gonna make you so happy. You're gonna have such a great time. When really it's like talking with parents of children that are addicted to substances breaks my heart every time.
Mm.
Like, because they're at a point where they're like, typically, whenever we're getting involved, it's like they've been victimized so much that they're like, this isn't my child anymore.
Wow.
This
Wow.
is the evil meth monster or fentanyl monster that's willing to forsake everybody that loved them for their new master, right?
Mm.
And it's just, I feel awful because it's like they're looking to us for answers, and it's
Yeah.
like, get a restraining order, which means that you can't talk to this person and they can't talk to you because they're not at a point where they want help yet. And it's like I tell them almost every time, I'm like, I am so sorry that you're going through this. Like this, I can't imagine what you're going through because this breaks my heart.
Realistically, I don't know how to phrase this question, but like, how often do you see people like get out of these addictions, or how terminal of an addiction does it seem to be?
I have seen many, many, many try and fail. I've talked to a few that at least told me that they've recovered, that they've made it back, and they seemed honest, seemed sober. Um, and I always congratulate them, like, dude, that
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what the situation, like, you could be under arrest for anything or anything could be going on. I'm like, that is a huge deal because so few, like, I encounter that so rarely.
Yeah.
And like working in the prison, like, the folks in there that were addicted to substances, like, they're still present there.
Mm.
Like, it's whenever I was working out at Goose, like they were given Suboxone, excuse me, Suboxone, which is buprenorphine, I believe, which is used to help people get off of opiates, heroin. But if you're not an opiate addict, it'll get you high, and so they would sell those
Interesting.
in prison. But your first hit's for free. Like they're just giving this stuff away. And it's like because there was such an influx of those in the prison. But
Mm. So, what are some of the best resources out there that you know of in Anchorage or even out here that you have seen? I know that I'm sure there are some resources that are not very helpful and some that are. I'm just curious if there's some that you're like, I always want to send people there, or
so that's a hard one for me to answer on patrol because we give them the resources
mm-hmm.
and then I may never see that person
Yeah,
again
sure.
or know if they followed through. Um, as far as alcohol goes, the Chris Kyle Hospital in Anchorage is great. Like, but typically it's veterans and law enforcement that
Mm-hmm.
go there. But
And Chris Kyle was the American Sniper
mhm,
guy, right?
yep,
Okay.
yeah. So it's over off Burgaw Street,
Okay.
north of Northern Lights. A great resource if you have somebody that's struggling with that. At least give them a call.
Mm-hmm.
Um, see if they'll take them if they got room available. It's a fairly small facility, but very effective.
It's interesting that social media is being used in this way. It's not surprising, but I think it's important to know. And I remember reading about just how some cultural changes taking place in the last couple decades, where in the last 20 years, youth seemingly have just a different set of values in some ways. And one of them was a 16-year-old, if they had to choose between having a driver's license and a functioning car, or to have a smartphone and fast internet, if they had to choose which one to have, the vast majority were choosing the phone and the internet.
Mm.
And how the independence of driving around in a car. And we used to be turning 16, driving was such a huge deal, but there's such a desire to be in the collective, to have that social circle digitally. And and we love being together. We love friends. We want to be accepted. We want to be part of the group. Like, that's pretty natural. But knowing that in some of the social media that there is these avenues um, to a lot of hidden, easy to hide activity, because there's lots of other things in Snapchat
Mm-hmm.
but things like that is out there. So I just think of how vital it is to, like, technology is an excellent servant but a terrible master. And if we, especially if our children are allowed to have such exposure to social media, it's just knowing you got to know there's sharks in those waters.
Yeah. There's a book that I really want to read this year by I don't know how to say his last name. It's Jonathan Haidt, I think, Haidt, and it's called The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness.
Interesting.
And it's sort of just it's taken over as a number one seller sort of thing right now. And he's tracing a lot of what you're saying, the way technology in general, social media in particular, is rewiring brains, creating anxiety, and so that makes me think of a question about, as you've been talking a lot about people who are suffering from addictions and things like that, just mental health in general. I mean, what, from your perspective, because we all, I think, everyone listening has experienced either personally or in their families some sort of mental health problem or issue that they're trying to work on. But just in the public, how much is that how big of a problem is that, and how do you see that day to day?
So I think mental health is too broad of a term
Sure.
because, like, if I'm having a bad day and I'm feeling really low today, not being addicted to anything, not having any of that in my past, that's mental health, right?
Mm-hmm.
My mental health is unwell. But then you have people that are addicted to controlled substances, which alters their state of mind even when they're sober. And so then you have that's labeled as mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a common theme with substances and mental health, and it's hard to say which came first,
Yeah.
right? Like, this person has some mental health issues, and also, so we have people that have mental health issues and don't like their meds, so they self medicate with controlled substances.
Okay.
But then you also have people that were normal that start using controlled substances, and now they have mental health issues even when they're sober.
Mm.
And which came first? Like, it's hard to say. So mental
Yeah.
health and controlled substances go hand in
And
hand.
does it bring things to the
The
surface, or does it cause things to get implemented in there, or both? And
Hard to say because some people will seem more linear in their own mind. Like, oh, um, there was a guy that we would deal with all the time, pretty severe mental health issues, would self medicate. He since has passed away, got struck by a motor vehicle on the highway. But he, I was talking to him one day. He had a warrant, and between his ranting, you would get like a moment of like clarity where it's like, hey man, why do you do this? Why do you take this? Oh, it makes the voices stop.
Mm.
Like, makes the voices stop. Okay, but then you like are out doing whatever, that isn't what normal rational thinking adults would do. Yeah, it's hard to say.
wow, something we want to learn how to minister to more, because we all have these different struggles in different ways, and try to have compassion, because everyone is so different and has all sorts of different struggles, but also be wise with either boundaries for families. But I think of trying to help young people or anyone prevent getting into those types of habits that can cause such damage to themselves and those around us. Um, so just thinking with that, whether that's just community, family, higher values, purpose, um, trying to really, um, people tend to listen to the loudest voice in their life, making sure that there's a clear ringing of truth instead of, because loneliness, I can only imagine loneliness being a pretty major factor into many people's lives, driving them to certain things. But changing gears a little bit, you know, being a police officer, you have quite a wide spectrum of things you have to respond to. And I think of how not just chaotic that might be at times, but how do you manage going up to a traffic stop and it might be like the nicest person you ever met, who an old lady just didn't see the speed limit there and was going 10 over or something, or it might be like some loser and be the last day of your life. Like how do you navigate the day to day, like jack in the box
Mm.
of every situation?
I like to think that I'm always the same. I talk to people at work how I talk to you guys. Hey man, what's going on today? At the beginning of like every contact I have is almost exactly the same, minus my traffic stops, right? Because typically I identify myself and then, hey, here's why I pulled you over. Do you have your driver's license, proof of insurance on you? And then, what's going on today? Small talk.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get people that don't want to small talk. I don't answer questions. I don't talk to police. Cool. Like, you don't have to talk to me. That's okay. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be rude to you. And I talk to the people that could be dangerous the same way I talk to the sweet old grandma that
Mm-hmm.
didn't see the stop sign and nobody else was on the road. And
Are most people respectful, or is it like you get a lot of belligerent sovereign citizen, I pay your salary type stuff?
those stand out because that's pretty fairly rare. Like
Okay.
even the type of work I do, like I like looking for bad guys, like really bad guys that did bad things, but I talk to them the same. So, yes, they may be belligerent, but they're, it's like, hey, stop. There's a reason I'm stopping you. And then there's the chasing, like, oh, they're running away. Like, stop or you could be injured. And then the tackling and the use of force, like, oh, take down whatever and put your hands behind your back, giving them clear commands, which may sound mean. And sometimes we get bystanders like, you didn't have to yell at him like that. It's like, did you see
Yeah.
what was happening?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, man, could you put your arms behind your back?
Can you
Yeah.
please, hey, stop it, please.
But then once that's over, it's a complete change of gears, right? And that's something that some people struggle with, but it's, you know, a light tap on the shoulder. Hey, man, are you good? Do you need medics? Are you hurt from what I just had to do to you? But it's, they made bad choices. I was the consequences of those choices. Now that's over with. Like, can we be cool?
Mm-hmm.
Like, my tone of voice changes. Hey, are you good? Do you need medics? Do you need somebody to come out? Are you hurt anywhere? Hey, let's roll you over. Do you have any weapons on you? Like,
Yeah.
quick pat search, down and dirty. Look them over. Like, oh, dude, you got cut on your forehead. Like, do you want medics? Oh no, I'm good, man. Like, all right, you sure you're good? Like, you just let me know if that changes.
How much of that is like police protocol that you have to follow, and how much of
Yeah.
that is you
I was
just
gonna ask
having a
that.
mindfulness of things?
Catch more flies with honey than vinegar, right? So if this person is like, we're where we're at, right? So usually it's like a warrant or something. I have to remand you on. Now you've resisted arrest. Now you've assaulted me. Now you've whatever. Like that's done with. If I can change my tone and maybe make them be more cooperative and less of a pain in my backseat, not cussing at me the whole way to the jail,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't work every time. Like you still get the people that cuss you out the whole way, and it's like, okay, well, I'm just gonna.
Did you
Why?
have training in this? Like do police officers have training in de-escalation and some of
Oh,
these?
absolutely.
Yeah. So
Um,
what's that like? I mean, what's that training like?
what they're like reality-based training, so it's
Okay.
like, hey, try and give options, try and create distance, right? That's a
Okay.
big thing. It's creating distance, especially with like somebody with a weapon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not like a gun, but let's say it like a knife. If I can create distance, they're not causing harm to anybody else right at this moment. Like we've got them like in a room and just try and dialogue. But some,
Mm.
like we're all people. Police officers are people.
Mm-hmm.
People are good at some things and some people are not so good at other things, right?
Right.
Like we all have our skills, and the more we work with each other, the more we recognize like, oh, Jeremiah likes to talk. Like he'll just start talking if there's a lull in the conversation.
That's why we have you on the podcast.
Yeah,
That's right.
absolutely. So, like, hey man, what is going on? What? Okay, well, listen, man, we don't want you to get hurt. We don't want anything to happen. We can talk way more about this, but can you do me a favor? Can we put down that weapon, please?
Mm.
Like, we absolutely do not want you to get hurt. So then it's their decision, right? Like, I want to help you. I want to talk to you. I want to hear your side of the story because you have one. It might not be good. It might be incriminating, but there's a reason you did what you did.
And people respond to that. People.
Everybody responds to it positively, not always.
That's right. Everyone responds.
Yeah.
My dad was a correctional officer for like 20 plus years, and what you described reminded me something he said of approach determines response.
Yep. Absolutely. I heard that a lot in the prison.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that a lot less in policing, but it's just a different name, right? The hello test. Every traffic stop is a hello test. You know, hey, I'm Officer Collins. Pulled you over for this. That's the hello test. How they respond is how this traffic stop's going to go.
Oh.
And usually, if they're rude to you, it's okay. Well,
Now we know.
they failed the hello test.
What's
Yeah.
the like danger sign? What's the like when you say hello? What's like red flag in the hello test of like, okay, this went from
Well, nervousness, right? Like,
okay.
so, and that's hard to judge, right? Because it's like, is this person nervous just because my wife's nervous around police officers and she's married to one? And so it's like, where is this nervousness coming from? And it's like, hey, is there anything in the vehicle that I should be concerned about? You have a weapon on you, like, and sometimes just calling it out, like, okay, dude, you are profusely sweating. You're looking for exit avenues and you keep reaching towards your crotch. Like, what are you hiding?
Mm.
Man, you have to extrapolate so much information from just someone's tone or the lack of things when you're talking to people.
And that is a lot of it's from learned experience, right? Like, everybody, the majority of people have like little like sensors, right? And like, oh, I see a vehicle and like, man, I really want to pull that thing over. But when I was a newer officer, it was like I had trouble finding why. Why do I want to pull that over? And it's usually because something, my probable cause was there, but I just wasn't
Yeah.
knowledgeable enough to know what it was.
So your intuition was there, but you didn't have
Right.
like the process to act on it.
The knowledge of it. Yeah. And it's like, I don't like doing stuff that I'm not confident. It's like initiating a traffic stop. Like, ah, man, I think that's a rule, but like, I really, like, I really take people's constitutional rights very seriously, and I
Mm,
do not want to violate those. So, all the way back to our Title 47 conversation, like, dude, we are violating somebody's rights. We're taking you against your will, right? So, I need to make sure because we get calls all the time, like, hey, can you go do a welfare check on so and so? They were making some very vague suicidal statements. And so it's like, call them, like, hey, what do you mean vague? What'd they say? Well, they just said I want to go to sleep. It's like, well, why did you find that worrisome? Oh, well, because before that they just said they're tired of living. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, we can go and chat with them. And you go and talk to the guy, and it's like, dude, so and so called. They said they were worried about you. You know, said you wanted to go to sleep. What do you mean by that? And you, dude, I've been up for like 80 hours. That was like,
I want to go
that
to
w-
bed.
I'm tired. I want to go to sleep. They keep texting me, and so I just at this point I'm just tired of this conversation. It's like, okay, well, we're not violating your rights. We're not taking you against your will, like.
Mm-hmm.
But you do know if you get that way, if you have those thoughts, please call us, because I would much rather come to you having those thoughts and we can go get you help than coming to your house and you no longer being here.
Yeah. What's been like one of the strangest calls you've responded to? Like taking a cat out of a tree, the stereotypes.
Oh my
Any
gosh.
any weird ones?
Chasing a cat from under a house. A
Yeah.
woman called the police for that. Like, can my cat that I took in off the streets 2 days ago is under my floorboards and I can't get it out.
Do you have to respond to those?
I got dispatched.
Does someone not like you at dispatch? Or like
It's possible. Or maybe they just know I'm like nice and wouldn't say no to this poor old woman
Jeremiah
that
would do it.
stealing cats off the street. We got that cat out though, by
Yeah.
golly.
That's right.
Nice.
Yeah.
Was it still alive?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It had been under there like 2 hours. It was hiding from her because it was not her cat.
Yeah.
Wow. So you mentioned about how you are the consequences to people's actions sometimes. And so, I'm thinking of, Romans 13 and about how I'll just read a portion of this, starting at verse 1.
Never a wrong choice.
It's, we just need a lot more of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's never good for scriptures to collect dust. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of those who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is a servant of God and an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. So, you're law enforcement, and so you're not necessarily the ruler, but you are an extension of the rules that have been put in place here. And the Lord has a direct involvement in the institution of really civilization. He rises nations up and he lowers them down. And so you don't make the laws, but you help enforce the laws. And there is an involvement of the Lord in that. So you're talking about being the consequence or bringing the consequences to a person. And I just think of that imagery, not holding the sword in vain. And I saw another statistic too about like the integrity of police officers, like just statistically, societally. It was amazing about how law enforcement police officers statistically are the least likely to commit crimes, to be, more so than clergy or other, people in medical fields. That just statistically, it seems like law enforcement are character wise tend to be the best in the United States wise, but they get such a negative reputation. Of course, there's bad cops out there, and good cops make bad choices sometimes too. But just thinking about you and people like you that are out there serving, and that you're not just out there doing what you think is right, like there is a standard you have to hold to. But it's curious for how do you how do you see yourself in this role? Like, how do you bear the responsibility, or I guess, what type of responsibility do you see on yourself in this role?
in that role specifically,
Yeah, as a police officer.
in the role of a police officer,
Yeah.
the I try not to think about it because there is so much responsibility. Like I was talking about with the Title 47 and violating people's rights. Like,
Yeah.
what if I go on a call and somebody's claiming somebody else is suicidal? I go, I talk to them, they deny it, I walk away, they kill themselves.
Mhm.
Like, that's who does that fall on? It definitely brings my call back into question, right? Like, what did they say? Now, so there's always a ton of responsibility that we have, obviously willingly, because I applied for the job.
Yeah, you're not
Mhm.
conscripted into it.
Right.
Right. And I could quit at any point, but it is an enormous amount of responsibility. Mind you, there are very few other jobs that your every action is recorded.
Mhm.
Like, I'm required to have my body cam now that we have them on at all times.
Is
Now,
that new? Having
fairly new within like the last couple years. Yeah. I love them because people would make allegations to get out of the consequences of their actions. And it is a headache and a nightmare and daunting because it's like, well, oh, so and like officer so and so did this. And it's like, well, now I have to call a supervisor. But now it's like, officer so and so did this. And it's like, cool. Now I get to call a supervisor. Like, hey, my body camera's going. But they're claiming I did X, Y, or Z to them. Like, and it's just so much of a peace of mind for me because it's like I conduct myself in a way at work that I
Yeah, if you're
doesn't
doing
bother
what's
me.
right, you have nothing to hide.
But as far as that verse is concerned, I still think I like to do what's right. Like even like yes, I have my faith, I have the scriptures to fall back on, and there are laws that are in place, and I have a job to do that I applied for, that I get paid to do. And as much as I don't like it sometimes, I have to enforce that law. It's like, man, I'm really sorry, but this is this is not my choice. I wish you hadn't have done this, but we're gonna have to go to jail today, or I'm gonna give you a piece of paper and a court date,
Mhm.
like for you to go to jail for your nonviolent misdemeanor crime. But I don't know. That's it's a scary verse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I imagine.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, because normally for most of us who read this verse, we're on the be subject part of it, to be subject to the governing authorities. And of course, there's many authorities that you are still subject to. We all are. But I was just imagining what it must be like to read this passage on the other side of the fence in some ways.
Well, as an American, I buck up at this verse. Like, you have to check yourself. Like,
Mhm.
well, we overthrew a government to start our country, and
Future episode.
right? So it's like, but then, it's like, well, it's established by somebody higher than me. I should probably defer to their goodwill, and whatever we get as a country is what we deserve. And we're just here to do our best and serve the Lord and to spread his message as much as possible.
Was it you that said that bad government's better than no government?
Yeah, it was in prep for um, my lecture for the lectureship last year, talking about the title I was given was Political Participation for a Purpose. And it came out of a book I had read to prepare for it. And it was just talking about just the danger of anarchy. And it's just like bad government is still better than no government. Like when people the end of Judges, everyone did what was right in their own eyes, for there's
Mm-hmm.
no king in Israel. It's like when you leave people on an island to their own devices, um, things are going to spiral pretty quick.
Eh, I would disagree with you.
Tell me
Uh,
more.
the establishment of the king was not at God's wish, it was at the people's, and God wanted to be their king. Now, the people executed it poorly, but that was not the desired role of government for in God's eyes, right? For the Israelites. He was to be their king, not, and he is through Jesus, but that was not pleasing to him. But that was one of the many instances that we see God acquiescing to the wishes of the people.
Yeah, so God definitely had an expectation for what he wanted his people to do, and he did not. Saul was a very optically desirable king, um, with being a head taller than everybody else, and just kind of stereotypical leader, warrior, macho, epic dude. Um, but then David's selection to be king was from the Lord. And I think it points to that God puts power in place, even the kings of Israel. And it's actually a really interesting thing where I think it's in Deuteronomy, Moses writes out expectations for
So I
kings
was going to
and,
say,
and eventually kings to, and Jesus being the king on the throne of David, that the the Israelite kingship wasn't only a response to Israel's desire to be like the nations around them, because you were totally right. Israel was like way out of line when they were wanting a king, because they were wanting a king for all the wrong reasons.
hmm
And we can desire power and authority over us to give us what we want, but just like God mentions, like they're going to tax you, they're going to take your sons and go to war, they're
hmm
going to do all the things, like you're not going to be happy with this, but He allows it to happen. But then He redeems it with Jesus. But it gets into a bigger picture of God is so involved in our world, and He puts leaders in place in nations, even our nation, all nations, and that power He puts in position trickles down to each traffic stop. And so the sword you hold, the gun you have in your holster, to a certain degree, fundamentally, is there by God's will. And when people talk about defund the police or talk about, um, I think there certainly needs to be an extremely high level of accountability. The um, body cams, I love that, the confidence you have with
hmm
having a body cam, because you don't need to defend truth. Truth can defend itself. And
Right.
like this is, you have nothing to hide if you're doing things that are right. Uh, but there's such a need um, for law enforcement.
hmm
And that's not just because we've discovered that in the United States as like a nice thing. It's that the Lord actually constructs civilization. And one of the super fundamental things of civilization is having laws that can be enforced. And having some bad laws being enforced is better than no laws
hmm
being enforced.
You ever watched the show The Mentalist?
No.
I think I've seen an episode or two.
Yeah, so there's this episode where Patrick Jane, one of the advisors, used to be a fake psychic, whatever, and then loses his family to a serial killer. Uh, they're like investigating this murder, and they're in this arcade where the victim had worked at, and one of the detectives agents uh, goes up to talk to one of the kids, and he's like, "Yo, man, f the police."
hmm
Mm.
And Patrick Jane's like, "You understand that that's like saying f the public transit system. Like every major civilization has police."
hmm
And the kid just like looks at him all confused.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, picking back off what Mike was just saying. So on the one hand, we're just talking about the way, according to Romans 13, just we were asking how you process the responsibility, like that's bigger than just what our country expects, but like this is a God instituted governing authority and role and just that burden. On the other hand, as he was alluding to, the police have a certain reputation over the past few years, some very positively, some negatively. And the things that I know from like media bites or opinions thrown out here or there. And but just from your perspective, like how has the public opinion for better or worse the past few years, like how has that impacted your day to day? And how does that how do you process some of these things like defund the police and how can you help us understand some of the like the societal opinions and reputation that the police have right now?
Do your own research. Don't listen to what other people tell you about a situation. Maybe if you want to actually know the answer, like go see if that video footage has been released.
Mm-hmm.
Most police departments, agencies have body cameras now. Um,
Yeah.
it so quick to be first, and the quickness to call the person on the receiving end of deadly use of force a victim
Mm.
is mildly frustrating, right? Nationwide, it's like, oh, well, we immediately, sure, if you want to look into it, but maybe keep your looking into it until you've found all the information, seen all the footage. I'm not saying police officers never get in bad shoots
Oh,
or
sure.
bad use of forces, but get all the information that they have. Come do ride-alongs. Go do ride-alongs with your local police departments
Mm-hmm.
and see what they on a day to day. Like I always try and to get into something whenever we have ride-alongs with me or with somebody working close to me in my general vicinity, so they can see kind of the stuff that goes on and the situations that we go to.
Mm-hmm.
One of my buddies had a rider uh, a while ago, like 6 months or more ago, and it was a busy day of officer initiated activity, but we ended up finding this vehicle that had eluded us, had to locate, actually had eluded the officer that found it uh, several weeks prior. So it's at a park. Park's busy. It's a beautiful sunny day out. And this dude's passed out behind the wheel with his foot on the brake and the vehicle still in drive. Um, Kids playing at the park, which that vehicle is facing.
Mm.
And so he requests, more officers. So I get there and he's like, hey, we can't block in the front just the way the vehicle's positioned. So let's just get on that driver's side wheel. And if he starts to move at all, like we're just going to push.
Mm-hmm.
And he wakes up and sees officers around him and starts to try and get away. And so we pushed and
Mm.
got uh, ran through like a little barricade thing and then ran into like a power pole away from children. So it was just one of those things where it's like all these like, oh, it's just not as simple as, oh, we show up, we block in a vehicle. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, we have kids playing right here and this dude's passed out potentially, like what if we ignore it and he slips
Yeah.
his foot off the brake and
Right.
there goes a kid.
Yeah.
I just have so much respect for how many variables there are for each things you guys have to deal with. I feel like so many other professions, there's kind of like an overarching mission that you're equipped to specifically do, but then just like situations like that, if like you have to factor in so many things and every single situation is so different.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So have you noticed in the past 4, 5, 6 years, however many years it's been, with the rise of things like defund the police or different protests and things like that, how has that affected your like that reputation in the community? Has that affected your day to day with people?
Very minimally. Like
Okay.
the community that we serve realizes that there is a large need
Mm-hmm.
and we are well short of the officers that we need.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a large push in Anchorage and the surrounding communities, like hire more of us. Like they're
Nice.
really wanting more of us, and every department that I can think of in the state is hiring right now.
Mm,
So if you're interested, come and do a ride along, go
nice.
do a ride along, and then see if it's a good fit. Like see if
Nice.
that's something you would enjoy. Don't be like me and not do ride alongs first
Mm-hmm.
and just assume that Yeah, you'll pick it up as you go. Like, go see what you may be getting into.
Make sure to open the doors for people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. Don't forget your manners.
That's right.
Yeah.
Either at the academy or from the police department directly, is there anything specific about law enforcement in Alaska that's distinctive from other places? Anything like special things you guys have to be extra mindful of or have to factor in?
Other than the atrocious winter we're having this year and terrible driving conditions, slow down, please,
How to
all the time.
how to respond to moose and bear.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a summertime activity typically, but
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know that that's special to Alaska. Like,
Mhm.
try and get the black bear off the playground. Like, I've been to that call. Like, our kids want to go out to recess and there's a black bear in our dumpster on the playground. Like, what do you do? Uh, I don't know. Call animal control? Like, yeah, that's not an option. Like, it is an option. Like, that's what you do, but a less lethal round to the rump usually will get them going the other way and
Mhm.
have a lethal option.
From cats, bears, and moose. That's pretty
That's so
awesome.
fun.
So, thinking about, there's a lot still in my mind that we're start wrapping up the episode, but did I tell you about your process of when you were getting hired for the Anchorage Police Department? I was one of your references.
Yeah.
Did I tell you this story?
Yeah, you did.
And
I have not heard this story.
oh, I love this story, and it's also kind of a sad story. But of so I was in Texas. I don't remember I was down there for some trip, but I was one of your references for your police department for being a police officer. And this lady calls me, and we have like an hour and a half, 2 hour conversation about Maya getting into the police department. Gave him a glowing review, honest review. Um, but then at the end, she's like, "Do you have any concerns about Maya being in the police department?" And I was like, "Well, I do have one, and is that from what I've heard and learned that there's a high divorce rate amongst police officers, and that's just a very stressful environment from what I've heard. And Maya has a wonderful family, and I would hate to see them be such under pressure that it
Mm.
caves." And the lady, I hope I don't get her in trouble. I don't know who she was. I don't even remember her name. But she just starts crying on the phone. And she's like, "That is so true. It is so hard." And we just start having like a quality conversation about the stresses of life and like the
Wow.
burdens of being in that role. And so just that just confirmed to me that that's true of that is a big struggle. So how has it been on your family now? It's been what, 7 years, 8 years?
7. Yep.
So how has it been on your family, the honor of getting to serve in this way, but also the stress of having to deal with everyone else's problems and the danger and everything that goes with it?
Well, my youngest, Fletcher, both my boys, when they were younger, wanted to be police officers, like since I am. I told Keith he was too smart, so he's not allowed to be. But Fletcher still thinks that he wants to be, but he tries to, Dad, you're calling out from work tomorrow, right? So you can stay home with me. I'm like, dude, you're going to school tomorrow. What are you talking about? Like, but that's a common trend. He wants me to stay home. So I would not be able to do this job without my wife. Now, granted, a lot of police officers are not Christian or practicing of faith, so that has to play a factor. But I would not be able to do my job without my wife, knowing that my wife has our home covered.
Mm.
And they sacrificed, like last night, I didn't get home till 4.5 hours after my shift was over.
Mm-hmm.
Got paid for 3 of it, but it was like they sacrificed so much time with me. And like, I am so blessed
Yeah.
over and over and over again with my wife. She is so amazing. Like, for one, for just being like, well, you're done being a correctional officer. Like, you are no longer allowed to do that job.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's good.
But putting up with me, like, that, the mental health thing, right? Like, and being able to go to the myriad of calls, like they take their toll. Like
Mm,
they don't just like you don't unsee things. And I think one of the questions on here, and I think you had just brought it up when we were talking about questions, was like how do you deal with seeing some of the stuff that you see? And I don't have an answer for you because it a lot of officers turn to drink, and
Mm,
it's a
right.
destructive personality trait that gets them in trouble. And it's like, I don't know. It's really challenging, and my
Sure.
family having to struggle through that with me, and my kids not understanding like why. Like, I don't know if you know this statistic, but police officers kill themselves at like way higher rate than any other profession.
Wow.
I did not
And
know that. Wow.
yeah, it's like I don't know the numbers. I want to say 51%, but don't quote me on that. Um, and like our department's struggling through one of our own that just
Mm,
did that. That was my supervisor for years, and like my
Oh wow.
kids, like that hit hard,
Yeah.
and like it still hurts. But my kids not understanding why I'm sad, and like
Yeah.
yeah, there's just stuff that piles up, and we have to be in order, right? Like how ridiculous would it be if a cop wasn't uh, squared away? And so can't ask for help. Like that's never pushed out by anybody, but I think it's just a mindset that we all tend to absorb.
Mm,
And so whenever we don't have an answer for ourselves, it you just shove it down onto the next call,
mm,
onto the next day. Like, yeah, that hurt. Like I might need a second, but then you're going to something different. You're going from somebody that killed themselves to a simple trespass where they just want somebody to leave to a motor vehicle collision with injury to, your day could just be filled with all these terrible events that uh, are people's worst day of their life, period. And it's another day for you.
mm,
And we have a saying that like your emergency isn't mine,
mm,
right? And that's to help us not get.
regulate your empathy.
No, not necessarily to not get emotionally involved, right? Like when emotions come in, they cloud your judgment, right? So we get called robots all the time,
Hmm.
but it's just a mechanism to deal with it. You like shut down your emotions for a while. Like I remember several years ago, there was a call that came in on the east side, and it was for a year-old child that was dead, not breathing. They're doing CPR. Well, they had messed up either somewhere in the communication had gotten messed up from them to dispatch or dispatch to me. It wasn't a year old, it was a day old. And
mm.
so I get there and I start doing compressions on this 1 day old baby that, in my eyes, looks just like my daughter did when she was a day old because all babies
Mm,
look precious and
Mm-hmm.
cute and sweet. And uh, when medics showed up, they like cut her clothes off, and it's like, oh, she's already got liver mortis, like she's dead. Like, yeah, we're calling it, and that killed me for a long time.
Yeah.
But it's just you go from that to another call. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's like how do you deal with that? How do you process that?
Mm-hmm. And to be present for the next call. Yeah,
Yeah.
for that
Well,
person.
because somebody could be a bad guy.
Right.
You got to not only, yeah, I got to be there for you, like the complainant, but there could be somebody wanting to hurt me. There could
Mm-hmm.
be somebody wanting to hurt you that I got to keep an eye out for.
Wow.
And it's like,
Do you guys have like chaplains or other resources
yeah,
there? Okay. Well, I wanted to ask, as we're coming closer to the end of the episode, you know, I've loved this conversation. This has been awesome and very insightful, and I'm very thankful for you and for all those who are serving alongside of you for our communities. And but you've been mentioning a lot just about how you've talked about your own personal experience and like understanding God as and his role in structuring society and the Romans 13 stuff and that you've mentioned some about seeing God at work in the community. As we're thinking about the church being equipped in a way that loves our neighbor and engages the community, you know, one of the things that I've really tried to communicate a lot in my own preaching and teaching is that, you know, church is not just, we're not like a goods and services place spiritually, where if you don't want to know God, where God is, you got to go to a church and that's where you get your God stuff. And then you can, it's like, we're not like a convenience store spiritually. Like
Hmm.
God's already at work in the world, in the community. And the church is an instrument he uses to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world. But if we have that default assumption that God's already at work in our neighborhoods, but also thinking about, you talked a lot about addictions and the problems that we see in society. Like, what would be some advice that you might give to a congregation if they really wanted to take a step forward in loving their neighbor and engaging the community? And really dealing with the whole person. Like, what are some ways we could do that?
For those that are already suffering through that,
Yeah, just like you only know what you know about your neighbors. Like, if you want to love your neighbor, you gotta know what they look like. And
be out there.
yeah,
Like substance abuse, you're trying to fill a hole, right? A hole where God should go.
mm-hmm,
Like like Mike had said earlier, you don't just wake up one morning and like, oh, I'm gonna get addicted to heroin today.
right,
But there, other than the pain med avenue, right? Because that's something that should be caught, right? Uh, Internally, like, oh, I think I'm getting addicted to this. But for everybody else, like there's a hole that's they're trying to fill, and the harvest is plenty, right?
mm-hmm,
Like
Mm-hmm.
we're told that they're like just get out there, don't be afraid,
yeah,
be mindful, but don't be afraid to get out there and spread the word
yeah,
because there are you're going to get told to go away a lot
mm-hmm,
by people that you're offering food or whatever for. Like that's usually a, a good thing to bring for people that are suffering through that. It's food and water. But that, it's a hard answer for those because it's like they may not even realize they need help. They may
mm-hmm,
not even realize where they're at.
yeah,
But our suicide rates are high,
yeah,
and a lot with youth. You were talking about technology and that, and it's like everybody's dirt stinks the same, right?
mm,
But they don't present that on social media.
right,
And so there's often an uptick in I don't have this perfect life that so and so has when that person's not being honest
mm-hmm,
because they're portraying their perfect life, but everything's dressed up. You know, your clothing piles in the corner, so it's off camera. Your whatever's out of order, so it looks like you have this perfect life, and that's what the consumer is comparing it to. And then, well, I don't have this, I don't have this, and constantly our youth are constantly focusing on the negatives, which is detrimental to their mental health.
mm-hmm,
And so like we go to suicide calls with teenagers attempting a lot more than I would like
yeah,
that number I would love if it was zero,
mm-hmm,
but that there's people that are hurting out there, a lot of them.
Mm.
yeah.
And
I just hear you saying that from all everything you said. It's just I think important for us to remember that people are complex,
mhm,
and
absolutely.
that the church as the church who has this to offer, this gospel message to offer, probably should be a little patient with people and recognize there's layers to people in need that I think you mentioned it earlier. Like if you're trying to offer a resource to someone who's high, they're like, everything's great. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, and anyway, just some not treating it as a one-time fix. You know, well, I told them I can go about my way. That sometimes,
Filling a quota.
yeah, a spiritual quota in some ways. Yeah, just
Yeah.
being relationally connected and being patient with people and helping maybe some of those base layer needs.
Everybody's got a story.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
being quick to listen,
Mm-hmm.
slow to speak, having that high level of compassion for other people, not looking down, but looking for ways to serve, and just tender for what you said, Maya, for just the how do you go from this to that, and just think of the need for long suffering and
Mm-hmm.
love endures all things, and how this life is not easy, and being a Christian is not comfortable, and trying to be like Jesus, who was acquainted with grief. He was a
Mm.
man of sorrows. He wept over the loss of his friend. He wept over the condition of the city of Jerusalem. And so having that heart of staring the horrible in the face and feeling the pain of seeing it in such a sad state, but then still having a joy that's set before him, enduring the cross, despising the shame. And man, that is not a comfortable, easy thing to do. Like it's probably the least comfortable thing and the hardest thing to do. Um, and so you've really given us some really good things to think about, Maya, and really gave us some great insight for your role and all the many facets to it. And it's just the tip of the iceberg, but it's a good tip that I
Yeah.
think we've gotten into, and we're excited to go together in the right direction. So thanks again for coming on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, and appreciate everything you do. But also more than that, we're thankful to call you a brother,
Yeah.
Hmm.
and that's the greatest relationship we could have. And so that's one of the things I love about the church. There's so many gifts and stories and perspectives. And that's one of the things we're excited about having guests on the podcast, be able to hear. I mean, Mike and I are not in that in the world you're in, and so
Yeah. Yes, you are.
yeah,
You just may not see it the same, right?
exactly.
Like we as people do a terrible job at living in our bubble
Mm,
because police officers, everybody's a suspect, right? Like we're notorious for that as opposed like, oh, I can't believe that they didn't see this guy, doing this. But at the same time, they're like, my wife, how did you see that expired tag from like 5 cars away, but you can't find the mustard in the fridge? You know what I mean? And it's like because we all
oh,
live in our world, like
yeah.
different things.
I was curious how hard it is for you to turn off your like search mode that you're always in, or like police mode, when you're non-duty, to not see things a certain way.
I don't know that there's an off switch.
Yeah, that's what I imagined.
It, but it's also just like an awareness thing, right? Like it you just are paying attention to the world around you, and I see things, and it's like, oh, hey, there's that, and then it's like, oh no, not not even at work right now.
Yeah. Let me let me ask for myself and then also for our listeners. If someone wanted to go on a ride along, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, just go to the website, uh, whichever department you would like to go on a ride along with,
Hmm.
and there will be instructions on there on how to do it.
Well, we shall do it.
That'll be really good. Well, we love you, Maya. We really appreciate this.
Yeah, love you guys.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us on this episode. And we're very grateful for the Lord that we get to have these conversations and to gain more insight about what's going on, and also how we can help and be a congregation, and to show the truth that this is a dark world, but there's light in this dark world. And we have the privilege and the honor to get to shine that light and invite others to do so too. So thank you for being with us this episode, and can't wait to see you guys next time.